The pounding on my front door started at 12:43 in the morning, during a thunderstorm strong enough to shake the windows in my house. At my age, people don't come knocking after midnight unless something has gone wrong. When I opened the door, there was a soaked teenage boy standing under my porch light holding an old photograph against his chest. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're Walter Grayson, right?" My father told my mom if anything ever happened to him, I should come here. Then he showed me the picture. My son-in-law was standing beside him and the boy quietly said, "They lied about how he died. Let me take you back to how it all started. I live in a small lake town in northern Michigan where people still pretend they know less about each other than they actually do. I was fire chief there for almost 30 years before I retired. My knees finally made the decision for me. Most mornings I wake up before the sun comes up. I make coffee my doctor told me to stop drinking 3 years ago, then sit at the kitchen table listening to the house settle around me. After my wife died, quiet became part of the routine. My daughter, Emily, lived about 40 minutes south near Harbor Ridge in one of those expensive lakefront neighborhoods where every mailbox looks custom-made and nobody parks an old truck in the driveway unless it belongs to the landscapers. We used to be close, not storybook close, just normal close fishing trips, Saturday breakfasts, long drives after my wife passed away because neither of us liked sitting in grief by ourselves. Then she married Daniel Mercer. At first, I liked my son-in-law well enough. Most people did. He was smooth without seeming fake. Always polite, always calm. Expensive watch. Nice truck. The kind of man who remembered birthdays and shook hands like he meant it. But there were little things, small things. My daughter would glance at him before answering simple questions. She apologized constantly. One Thanksgiving, she dropped a wine glass in the kitchen and immediately started saying, I'm sorry, before anybody reacted at all. My son-in-law didn't yell, didn't even raise his voice. He just stood there smiling. While she cleaned up the broken glass with shaking hands, I noticed it, then I ignored it. That became my specialty for a while, ignoring things politely. You tell yourself married people have their own problems, their own private language, their own boundaries. You convince yourself staying quiet is the respectful thing to do. And slowly, little by little, my daughter stopped coming around unless her husband came too. Then 5 years before that boy showed up at my house, my son-in-law supposedly died in a boating accident, engine trouble during a storm. Boat overturned near Blackwater Point, closed casket funeral. My daughter stood beside me during the service looking hollowed out. Not crying much, not angry, just emptied. After that she got even quieter. Every conversation felt careful, like she was choosing each word before speaking it. Let that become normal too. That's the part that stays with me now. Not the mistakes I made, the conversations I avoided having at all. The boy standing on my porch looked maybe 16 or 17, thin kid, exhausted, rain dripping off his sleeves onto my floor. I stepped aside. You better come in before you freeze. He walked inside carefully, like he wasn't used to being welcomed anywhere. I handed him a towel from the kitchen. What's your name? Noah, he said quietly. Noah Mercer. Hearing my son-in-law's last name attached to another kid felt strange in a way I can't fully explain. Like the floor shifting slightly underneath you. He kept glancing toward the windows while I made coffee. You hungry? He nodded once. I cooked eggs and toast while he sat at the table holding that photograph with both hands. Finally, I sat across from him and said, You need to explain this to me. He swallowed hard before answering. My mom died 3 weeks ago, he said. Cancer. I didn't interrupt. Before she died, she gave me a box with letters and pictures. She said if anything ever happened, if people started looking for me, I should come here. What people? He hesitated long enough for me to notice. I think men connected to my dad's company have been following me. Something tightened in my stomach. When he said that, not panic recognition, like hearing an old song you haven't thought about in years and suddenly remembering where you were the first time you heard it. The boy opened his backpack and pulled out several folded letters. My mom kept these hidden. I recognized my son-in-law's handwriting. Immediately, one letter said, I can't keep lying to Emily forever. I'm telling her everything after the marina deal closes. Then I'm done with Richard for good this time. Richard Voss, my son-in-law's business partner. I leaned back slowly in my chair. My daughter didn't know about you? The boy shook his head. My mom said my dad wanted to tell her. She said he was trying to leave the company before he died. Trying to leave. That sentence stayed in my head. Then I remembered something. About 6 months before the boating accident, my son-in-law came to my house alone. That almost never happened. We sat in my garage drinking beer while I fixed an old cabinet hinge. Quiet night. At one point, he asked me, "You ever regret staying quiet about something because you thought it kept the peace?" I laughed a little and said, "That's called marriage," but he didn't laugh, he just stared at the floor for a few seconds. Back then, I let the silence sit there. Now sitting across from that frightened boy at my kitchen table, I realized that may have been the closest thing to asking for help my son-in-law ever managed. I made up the couch for the boy that night. Around 3 in the morning, headlights passed slowly across my living room window. A dark SUV rolled past the house, then again 10 minutes later. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. Still, I stayed awake until sunrise. The next morning, I called my daughter. The second I mentioned the boy's name, the line went silent. Then she whispered, "Dad, why are you saying that name? You know who he is." Long pause. Then she quietly said, "You need to tell him to leave. Not confusion, not surprise. Fear, real fear." "What's going on?" I asked. "You shouldn't be involved in this." "That boy showed up scared to death." "I mean it." Her voice cracked slightly. "Please don't start asking questions about Daniel's company." Then she hung up on me. My daughter had never hung up on me before. I sat there staring at my phone for a long time. That afternoon, the boy admitted he'd been moving between cheap motels for almost 2 weeks. "Every time I stay somewhere too long," he said, "the same car shows up eventually." "What kind of car?" "Black Lincoln. Dark windows. Why not go to the police?" He looked embarrassed. My mom always said not to trust anybody connected to Richard. 2 days later, I drove him down to Harbor Ridge because I wanted answers face to face. The marina office still had my son-in-law's company logo on the building, but Richard's name had replaced his on the sign near the entrance. The second I introduced myself inside, people got nervous. A mechanic named Kenny finally walked outside with me pretending he needed a smoke break. "You were Daniel's father-in-law, right?" he asked quietly. "Yeah." Kenny looked around before speaking again. "Your son-in-law got scared near the end." My chest tightened. "Scared of what?" "He found something in the books." Kenny lowered his voice. "After that, Richard started keeping security around all the time. Lawyers, too. Daniel stopped coming in alone. Why didn't anybody say something after the accident?" Kenny gave a short laugh without humor. "People around here liked their paychecks." Before I could ask more, the office door opened and Richard Voss stepped outside. Tall man. Gray hair, expensive coat, the kind of man who spent years learning how to smile without showing anything real. "Walter Grayson," he said warmly. "Been a long time." He shook my hand with both of his, then his eyes shifted toward the boy sitting in my truck. For a split second, his smile disappeared, only for a second, then it came back. "How's Emily?" he asked. "Quiet. Still grieving," he said with a slow nod. "Daniel's death hurt all of us." There was something rehearsed about the way he said it, like he'd practiced the sentence too many times. That night, the boy admitted he recognized Richard immediately. "My mom had pictures of him hidden away," he said. "He came to our apartment once when I was little." "What happened?" "My mom locked herself in the bathroom after he left. I heard her crying for hours. I asked him if my son-in-law visited often. A few times." "Did he love your mother?" The boy thought for a second. "I think he felt responsible for her." That answer stayed with me. At first, I thought my son-in-law was simply a liar living 2 separate lives. But the more I learned, the more I started seeing a man trapped inside something bigger and uglier than I realized. 3 nights later, the boy went to collect the last of his things from a motel outside town. When we got there, the room had been destroyed, mattress cut open, drawers dumped onto the floor, bathroom mirror cracked. Nothing valuable taken. Just searched. The boy stood frozen in the doorway, They found me, he whispered. On the drive home, neither of us talked much. That night, the black Lincoln parked across from my house for almost 20 minutes, no headlights, engine running, watching. Finally went downstairs and dug out my old fire department. Shotgun from the basement. Hadn't touched it in years, I kept it beside the couch while pretending to watch television. The next morning, I drove straight to my daughter's house. When she opened the door, she looked exhausted, pale, like somebody who hadn't slept properly in years. The moment she saw my face, she stepped aside quietly and let me in. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and said, "Enough." She looked down at her hands. "Your husband was trying to leave that company, wasn't he?" "Nothing, my daughter." Her hands started trembling slightly. Finally, she whispered, "Richard controlled everything." I stayed quiet and let her talk. "Your son-in-law found money moving through fake companies. Offshore accounts, fraud." She rubbed her forehead tiredly. "At first he ignored it because the money was good. Then he realized what it actually was. What was it?" "I still don't know all of it," she said quietly. And honestly, I didn't want to. That hurt because I understood exactly what she meant. Sometimes people avoid the truth because they think not knowing will keep things stable. That had been my mistake too. My daughter kept talking. "Your son-in-law tried leaving twice. Richard threatened to ruin him financially. Then he threatened other things." "What things?" She looked toward the window before answering. "You remember how paranoid Daniel got near the end?" I nodded. "He wasn't paranoid." The room went quiet after that. Then she finally said, "Before he died, he told me if anything happened to him, I should never speak publicly against Richard." I felt anger settle into me then. Cold anger. The kind that makes you calmer instead of louder. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" My daughter looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Because you never asked." That one hit harder than anything else, because she was right. I had spent years calling my silence respect. To her, it probably looked like I stopped wanting to know her life. That night, I searched through old voicemail, archives on my computer. Most people don't realize deleted messages stayed stored in those systems unless you manually erase them. I found one from my son-in-law, 6 days before he died. His voice sounded tired. "Hey Walter, just checking in. Emily says you're fixing the dock already. Don't work too hard." Pause, then quieter. "If something happens to me, don't let Emily think staying was her fault." Another pause. Then the message ended. I sat there in the dark listening to it over and over. My son-in-law had known, or at least feared enough to leave breadcrumbs behind, and I missed all of them. That was the moment things changed for me. Up until then, I had mostly been reacting. After that voicemail, I started making decisions. I called a former firefighter named Ben Carver. I trained him 20 years earlier. Smart man. Honest. Eventually moved into state fraud investigations. We met at a diner outside Traverse City. I handed him copies of the letters and explained everything carefully. He listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he leaned back slowly and said, "Walter, if even half this is true, Richard Voss has had protection for years." I figured. "You understand what happens if we start pushing this?" I looked at him and said, "I spent too many years avoiding uncomfortable conversations already." That got the first real smile out of him. After that, things moved quietly. Ben connected us with federal investigators, already looking into money laundering operations around the marina business. Turns out Richard had been on their radar for years. They just never had witnesses willing to speak publicly. That changed when the boy handed over his mother's letters. Then, Kenny agreed to testify. Then another employee. Then another. Not because they suddenly became brave. Because once one person stops being afraid out loud, other people remember they're tired of being afraid too. Richard noticed the pressure immediately. The black Lincoln stopped hiding after that. One afternoon, it pulled directly into my driveway. Richard stepped out alone. I met him on the porch. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked tired. "Walter," he said calmly, "you're getting involved in things you don't understand. You murdered my son-in-law." His jaw tightened slightly. "No," he said carefully. "Daniel made bad decisions. So did you. Richard looked toward my house windows. Emily has had peace for years because people knew when to stay quiet. You should think carefully before destroying that. That sentence told me everything about the kind of man he really was. Men like him confuse fear with peace. I stepped closer and said quietly, "You don't get to talk about peace anymore." Then I walked back inside and locked the door. A week later, investigators uncovered altered maintenance, records tied to the boat crash, engine sabotage, intentional, and old deputy admitted rescue timelines had been rewritten after pressure from county officials, connected financially to Richard. After that, everything started collapsing fast. Search, warrants, frozen accounts, witness testimony. My daughter finally agreed to cooperate after meeting the boy, face to face. That meeting nearly broke me. The boy stood awkwardly in my living room holding those old letters while my daughter stared at him like she was looking at a ghost left behind by her husband. Finally, she whispered, "He has Daniel's eyes." The boy nodded once, then he quietly said, "I'm sorry." My daughter looked confused. For what? He stared down at the floor. For existing, I guess. My daughter started crying immediately after. That not loud crying, the exhausted kind. The kind that comes after carrying fear around so long your body forgets how to put it down. She walked over and hugged him before either of them fully understood why, and standing there watching them, I realized something painful. My son-in-law spent years trying to protect separate parts of his life separately. His wife over here, his son over there, secrets over everywhere. But secrets don't protect families. They isolate people until everybody's suffering alone in different rooms. Richard was arrested 6 months later. Fraud, conspiracy, witness intimidation, financial crimes, then murder charges tied to my son-in-law's death. The town reacted the way towns usually do. People who once bragged about knowing Richard suddenly acted like they barely remembered him. Courage arrives, late for a lot of people. My daughter testified publicly during the trial. Sat behind her every day in court. The first morning, her hands shook so badly she almost dropped her water bottle, but her voice stayed steady. When the prosecutor asked why she stayed silent so long, my daughter answered quietly, "Because fear starts feeling normal when you live with it long enough." Nobody said a word after that. Richard looked smaller during the trial, older too. Power disappears quickly once people stop protecting it. He was convicted on every major charge, life sentence. The boy moved into my house permanently after witness protection arrangements settled down. He started community college nearby with plans to transfer into engineering later. Good kid, quiet like his father. Sometimes I'd walk into the garage and find him taking apart broken radios or old engines just to understand how they worked. About a year after the trial ended, we finished restoring my son-in-law's fishing boat, the same boat they pulled from the lake after the sabotage. It took months. New engine, new wiring, fresh paint. The morning we launched it, the lake was perfectly still. My daughter stood beside me on the dock holding 2 coffees. For the first time in years, she looked relaxed. No tension in her shoulders, no carefulness in her face, just present. The boy climbed into the boat and looked back at us. "You coming?" I handed him the keys. "Your father bought this boat to fish with family," I said. "Seems wrong letting it sit tied to a dock forever." That made him smile. Small smile. Real one. The engine started clean and smooth. As the boat moved slowly across the lake, sunlight spread over the water in long gold lines. My daughter slipped her arm through mine quietly. And sitting there on that dock, I finally understood something I should have understood years earlier. Thought staying quiet made me respectful. Thought it made me wise. What it really did was leave the people I loved alone with things they were too afraid to say out loud. Silence didn't protect my family, it protected the man destroying it.